Welcome to Inkhaven Presents, Readings from the Archives, a podcast where I invite internet writers who I read and admire to bring essays to read and share with us. My guest today is Alec Thompson, a legal scholar from the University of Glasgow. Welcome, Alec.
Hello.
What are you going to read for us today?
Today I will read an essay I wrote during undergrad, but then substantially reworked during my time at Inkhaven, called More Legal Systems Very Different from Ours, Video Game Law.
Wonderful. Is there any setup we need to know about it? I think it's the first of a 4-part series.
That's right. It's the first in a 4-part series which explores what happens when you transplant one legal system into one with radically different environmental conditions. So the first one is about what happens when you take feudal law and you put it into a video game. The second one is what happens when you take German customary law from the 10th century and try to transplant it into an industrial economy in the 20th. So that's what the Nazis tried. Didn't work very well. And then the third one is about the Brits trying to keep their medieval law working all the way up into 1830 and 1840. Again, doesn't work super well. And the fourth is about Islamic law and how it was used to coordinate the Islamic maritime empire.
Wonderful. Let's listen to that.
More legal systems very different from ours. Video game law. David Friedman's Legal Systems Very Different from Ours is a rationalist classic, boasting a well-known Slate Star Codex book review and a follow-up fictionalized sequel, More Legal Systems Very Different from Ours, because I made them up. How about some even stranger legal systems? Reader notice, unlike Friedman, I come at law from a legal botanist perspective. I'm more interested in weird legal forms and the unpredictable evolution of legal rules qua legal rules than legal rules qua coordination mechanisms. So sorry if that is what you want, but if you are interested in legal zoology, then this is the post for you. The series will have 4 parts: video game law, Nazi private law, alphabetical English law, circa 1500 to 1830, and maritime Islamic law. Part 1 will be on the law which forms organically inside the digital world. You can find my earlier, less polished piece in my old blog. Legal System 1, Video Game Law. King Manus was dissatisfied. Lord Gluttony, leader of the Coalition of the Chillin, and self-identified moral degenerate, was overrunning his lands in the Great War. Castles across the Hyperion kingdom were under siege. His taxpayers were illegally deserting him. He was sleep-deprived from an all-night defense of the capital. Only a handful of loyalists still manned the barricades. And in the midst of this great turmoil, King Manus faced a larger, even greater danger. Numbers in his California martial arts dojo were down. This is the story of a legal system evolving inside a video game. It began with the English feudal system and ended with something alien and strange. The setting is Darkfall Online, a medieval MMORPG which ran between 2009 and 2012, and then from 2012 to 2016 as Darkfall Online Rise of Aegon. For much of this period, large portions of the main server were dominated by a group of hardcore role-players called the Duchy of Wessex. This group, led by King Manus, constructed an elaborate pseudo-feudal system comprising a royal church, shire court, chancery, treasury, trained clerks, royal history, legislature, the House of Lords, and, incredibly, an in-depth constitution called the Carta Solis. You can still get a flavour of their work from their forums. None of their institutions or laws were part of the game features. It was all socially constructed by the Duchy of Wessex role-players. When I interviewed King Manus, he suggested he was engaged in what he called practical roleplay. By structuring a class system with various ranks, paid soldiers, and routinely collected taxes, the Duchy could outcompete rival guilds. And it succeeded in this. For most of the game's short life, King Manus was the lawful ruler of the continent. But one of the strangest aspects of King Manus's rule was that it copied and pasted English feudal law into its courts. Thus, a legal system designed for a physical world was transplanted into one without death, pain, or even physical bodies. What happens when you charge someone for murder without the existence of death? Let's take an existing legal precedent as an example. On the 18th of March, 2014, Farron Stonewall was brought to trial for the murder of Zakiya Ajam. The primary witness was Zakiya himself. The problem with concocting a murder plot in a video game is that after murdering and robbing your target, he will respawn shortly after. In the assize of Farron Stonewall, Zach testified against Farron and provided screenshots of the comments she made in the global chat after killing him. As a result of Zach's immortality, the law of homicide was transforming into something unrecognizable. According to Wessex law, Farron was properly convicted with aggravated battery, supposedly a type of killing offence. Any medieval lawyer would tell you this is confused and conflates causing injury with killing. but can a killing offence without death even be called killing? Their discussion over battery was similarly distorted. Had Farron been charged with simple battery, she would have faced a comically lenient penalty. Throwing mana missiles, assaults with weapons, or just generally being annoying in other ways were subject to a tiny fine, 50 gold coins. But on reflection, this also makes sense. In a world where health regens automatically and pain does not exist, is any injury serious? Murder and offences against the digital person must be referring to something else. With a bit of investigation, the underlying logic can be distilled. Wessex crimes drifted away from protecting the body, with its social and emotional significance, and instead moved towards the harm of inconvenience. Resetting a character to their starting position, stealing their items, causing noise and being disruptive, all of these relate to detracting from a full experience of a game. In a video game, the basic good is not life, but fun. Thus, the quintessential wrong is not causing death, which is a mere inconvenience, but hindering a player's enjoyment. The principle of enjoyment helps explain other anomalies in the Dukey's substantive law. Given the triviality of death, many barbarisms were permitted which would destroy a real community. The provision for manslaughter, for example, read, "Bringing someone to death through a random attack without discussion first is a fine, punishable by 500 gold. Provided the players have a responsible discussion, killing and looting in private was perfectly legal." The law of self-defense was also very strange. Given magic was a game mechanic, what was reasonable was more open to interpretation. Thus, in the Assize of Farron argued, "He looked naked, but you can never underestimate those naked mages if he was one." Or Zack, in response to Faye's accusation that he didn't mark his allegiance properly, gave the amazing defense that, "I've been away from the game for several months." What is this defense? Zack was arguing here that there should be a newbie defense, and we are thus introduced to a bizarre new legal creature. A newbie is not equivalent to a child, possessing moral capacity, nor are they similar to a madman, someone in a trance, or a person acting involuntarily. They are fully conscious and fully autonomous. The only analogy which comes close is someone who wakes up from a coma and forgets all the laws of physics, including gravity, and how to move their limbs. Do they deserve a defense for some otherwise illegal action? "Your Honor, I only threw that fireball because I didn't know what the S key did." Even then, the analogy is weak. In the context of role-playing a legal system, the defense of newbie breaks the fourth wall. Yet clearly, the newbie defense cannot be ignored as breaking character. You want to encourage new players to stay in the game, and can't simply penalize them because the character ought to have known better. There's a genuine policy dilemma between protecting players from newbies and ensuring a healthy player base. After a 5-day trial, Farron was eventually found guilty of aggravated battery by the jury. Alas, this merely raised new problems. How do you punish someone without a body? The Dukey devised a series of ingenious e-punishments to keep the digital streets of Wessex safe. Minor offences like hitting someone with a club or burning them with fire would be punished with a small fine and a mark against the player's name. If the crime was more serious, the culprit might be subjected to forced labour, like harvesting wheat, or made to run around a fixed perimeter for a period. Or, if even more severe, they might be put in digital stocks before the community of Wessex. The unstocked perpetrator would then be taunted by other players, role-playing the throwing of rotten fruit and hurling general insults. The ultimate e-punishment was execution, and then exile from the Duchy of Wessex. Again, we see in these punishments no infliction of pain, but attacks on other different pressure points of the accused. Their reputation, identity, inclusion in the community, and enjoyment of the game. But we can go even deeper. What if the culprit creates a new account to evade justice? In an interview with the author, King Manus suggested IP address tracking would solve this problem. But it's hard to see how tracking by a casual could get around VPNs today. This unexpectedly touches on the most destabilizing element in the entire Wessex legal system, the emerging digital person. The question was raised squarely in the Assize of Darafos the Seaman. What crime, if any, is hijacking the account of another player? The court initially charged Darafos with theft and harassment, but due to his non-appearance after 4 days, the court ruled against him without giving a reasoned judgment. We should challenge their ambiguous framing. Players often invest significant time and self-esteem in their online personas. Would the case have been the same had the thief used the account to debase the character? For example, making the character engage in explicit perverted sexual acts, or ruining their character and reputation in the public forum. How do we treat an item of property with this level of personal and practical agency? One answer is that each separate account is a legal person, making the human player the president of a miniature state. Another is to treat each player as a legal person with consciousness, with many individual limbs in the form of accounts. This would be an alien legal creature, a mind capable of existing in multiple places at once, with many bodies acting in concert. Then, going further still, when the Duchy began spreading to other games, would this have meant the player also extended his limbs across the different worlds? How do we adjust punishment from game to game, when the laws of nature and moral conventions change? The Duchy of Wessex, before it was destroyed by the homophobic and anti-Semitic coalition of the Chillen, started to create colonies in other games, like the game Mortal Online. What would international law look like when the individual states have different laws of physics? What would we expect to see in exchange rates, say, between the Duchy of Wessex Gold and Minecraft Diamonds? Would we see cross-game bureaucratic tracking of identity? The questions go on and on. These are merely the first mutations which emerge in a video game legal system. The Duchy of Wessex ran for a mere 7 years, but massively distorted the feudal law seed. I think this was because the high interaction, high event focus in video game design created a legal system with a rapid metabolism. Even though players might only log on for a few hours a day, they expect constant stimulation and thus produce constant opportunities for legal conflict. With longer run times, I wonder how deep the divergence could have become. How long does it take for legal evolution to totally eradicate outdated concepts? Here, assault, execution, and the body, and replace them with a new set of better adapted legal appendages. Part 1 explored the relationship between the laws of physics and legal evolution. Part 2 will explore what happened when the Nazis tried to reforge their legal system according to mystical race science. Can Germanic common law serve a modern industrial economy, or will the obscure laws of legal evolution eventually return to the decadent Roman law?
All right, well, thank you very much for reading that. I enjoyed hearing it. What did you notice differently on reading it out loud than when you wrote it initially?
Well, I have a particular philosophy of writing, which is a bit at odds with the other Inkhaven residents here, which is I tend to write in a writerly voice. So a lot of the sentences and the structure of the paragraphs in that piece were really intended to be read, so I had to change them as I was reading it out. Because
They weren't intended to be read.
Yes, they weren't intended to be read. They're just intended to have quite elaborate sentence structures and multi-clause dependencies, so I had to change them around when I read it out.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think you edited a few words on the fly.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
That makes sense. Where did the post come from? Where did the idea for this emanate?
So at some point in my undergraduate, maybe in like 2018, I decided I just wanted to look for video game legal systems, because me and my friends had been playing Age of Empires 2, and we discovered you could do this thing where if you and the other person were much better than your opponents, you could basically dominate an all-v-all in sort of an 8-person game, and then impose your own legal system on the rest and make them obey. It's kind of sick. There's not really any reason to do it, but you can make the other players stop fighting one another. You can restrict their economy so they can't challenge you, and you get a kind of equilibrium for a bit.
Okay.
Anyway, I discovered you could do that. That's not very interesting, the legal systems we were imposing on these poor people. But then I was like, well, if we've done this, then surely some other people must have done it. So I went looking, and this one was one that I found just by pure chance, I think, on Facebook. And it's just really weird. So I did some research there. I wrote up a very short piece, which wasn't very good, to be honest. And then I was thinking about pieces that I could kind of update or improve a lot, and that's what this one is. It's a vastly improved version of that.
That makes sense. So, can you just explain a little bit more of the situation? So, how long did this game last for that you were looking at?
It's about 7 years across
7 years.
2 different games, yes.
And how many people were involved in this? Like more than 100?
I think, yeah. So I guess there's sort of different layers, because they had the kind of feudal pyramid. So King Manus is at the top, and he's this like Californian martial arts instructor, who I interviewed, which was quite fun. When I was an undergrad, I sort of texted him and I was like, "Hey, I saw your legal system that you create," and he told me all sorts of interesting things. So he was at the top, and then there was like a sort of inner circle of lords who seemed to be lawyers in Canada. I think that's where this came from. It's from they're Canadian lawyers. And then there was like a sort of third layer people who just loved Renaissance fairs, and they just loved role playing, and they're quite happy to be slightly lower down the feudal chain, because obviously, like, why do you want to role play as a serf? But they were happy to do that.
And was the game any good?
I have no idea. I didn't play it. The servers like not functioning anymore. It looked terrible. It looked like just a terrible game. But they yeah.
Did it have graphics? Did it have a whole 3D world you could go through?
So it was a kind of open world exploration medieval game.
Okay.
What was really strange, right, is that like this inner crew, who's about maybe 30 people, had constructed an elaborate feudal system and basically forced like non-role players to pay them taxes. So there was probably about 200 to 300 people just paying them taxes in a sort of feudal manner. So they would like rock up in their sort of knight's gear and they would collect the taxes, and people would just have to pay them
with the in-game currency.
With the in-game currency,
Yes.
they'd have to pay them gold. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. And then when you were finding out about it, where were the records of this legal like trials stored?
Yes. So they have a forum which is still active. You can go and view it, and they have all of their cases.
It's like an old PHP web forum.
Yeah. And they have all their old cases recorded, and the cases cite other cases, so it is actually a functioning like common law legal system. So you can you can find the cited cases. They also have a constitution, and they have like a Wikipedia for their. It's very elaborate. They have a history, a church. They have
so
a ducal court, so they had like disputes over their particular feudal ranks, and they would have little cases involving that.
And so the main like distinction that you point out in their piece is that obviously you die and then you respawn, which fundamentally changes many aspects of murder.
That's right.
Were there any other significant, like, I guess they accrued resources and money in the kind of usual ways that you would in real life and in games by like doing things and growing crops and such?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was thinking, well, why didn't they produce any contract law, or why didn't they produce really any property law, which is actually historically what the feudal system produced first. It produced property law, and then at some point later, it produced contract. But I had a look at the kind of FAQs, and I don't think the economy was complicated enough for like contract law to be needed.
Okay.
Also, I think the game features might actually obviate the need for contract law, because they can... I think they could create systems which basically just allowed them to trade very simply, bartering, and you could basically go to an administrator if you felt defrauded, and they could just reverse a transaction.
Okay.
So that kind of thing suppresses contract law.
So was murder the primary kind of prosecution?
The majority were murders, assaults, the account theft, which was pretty strange, insults to the king were fairly common. So a lot.
Wait. What is the... Like, if all the text is recorded.
Yes, that's right.
Then it's just a question of whether you consider it an insult.
Yes.
And that was what the arguments were in court?
That's right, yeah. So it's quite strange because it's a world of perfect proof. So a lot of the arguments, to be honest, a lot of the court cases have a kind of vague air of like kangaroo courtness to them, because like
do you recall any of the insults to the kings that were being debated?
Yeah, there was a guy who was sort of talking behind his back who was the chamberlain, and that was a big deal, so they had a big case, and then he got put in the stocks and everyone was like role playing throwing tomatoes at him. And
well, that sounds like good fun.
Yeah, it's very fun. Yeah, it's very fun. They had a lot of fun.
Okay. What was the alphabetical English law?
Right, yeah. So until about 1850, English lawyers sorted pretty much all their law using the alphabet.
But as in the first word of the law, or the names of the law?
Yeah, so for example, if a lawyer was like, I wonder what the law is on, say, bridges, they would have to go to this giant abridgment, and it would be like A, B, C, D, and then they would go to B, and it would be like borough, nope, and then they would find bridge. So all the law was just in these giant alphabetical tables.
And then you'd have to know, like, is it a contract or an agreement to go to the right letter?
There wasn't even contract law at this point, so it's
There was not contract law before 1850?
There was, but it wasn't like categorized as such. It had, it's the piece has kind of two themes. So the first is that the alphabet was being used far beyond its utility. It's very strange. The other thing is that the English lawyers didn't sort their law based on like substance, so they didn't do like contract, property, tort, and so on. They sorted it mainly by forms of action. So you might ask, like, do I have like a writ that I could use to sue someone for an agreement? Do I have a writ that I could sue someone for like their property dispute? So everything was just organized in these ancient writs, which hadn't changed for like 400 years. So it's very old-fashioned.
Interesting. When did your interest in law develop? I guess when you were playing the video games with your friends, or
Yeah, I was always interested in arguing, and I learned that there was this job you could do where you just argued for money, and I was like, wow, that's great. So So I just decided I wanted to study law. It suited me quite well because I'm very good at like the humanities subjects, but also had quite good strengths in the STEM subjects. And law felt like a good kind of in between. It's quite structured and logical, but also language is its medium, so that was appealing. Yeah, and also it was just fun messing with people with the legal system.
Did you have friends at the time that were interested in law, or was this a very solitary interest?
There was there was maybe like one or two people.
Yeah.
There was quite a pretty girl who liked law,
Oh.
and I used to ask her to go to like court with me for like. Yeah, we'd go and sit in her in court. It was really fun. And I remember once going and I was like, I went up to the bailiff and I was like, are there any good cases on today? And he was like, aye, there's a murder case in court 4. And I was like, whoa, okay. So we went to court 4 and it was this insane case involving like 4 guys went to rob a gas station, although obviously that's not what you'd call it, but like a petrol stop.
Yeah.
And 3 of them were like robbing the register, so like serious deal. But one of them just thought they were stealing sandwiches, and so they all ran in together, and like 3 of them pulled out guns, and they were like, "That's it, give me the money." While he's just like shoveling sandwiches into the bag. And the question is, could he be charged for like being part of the wider scheme? And the judge basically he saw us in the court, and he explained it all, and he gave us like a little he gave us a little sort of speech.
Was there like 10, 20 people in the room?
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
So he was sort of saying.
You were like 16?
Yeah, he saw us at the back and he said, sort of, this is the law of art in part. And then, of course, as we all know, the law of art in part is such and such. And we were like, oh, yeah,
okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I don't know the state of common law, but I suspect that he at least is responsible for the momentum of people going, all right, we're going to go in and do this crime, even if he had a slightly different crime in mind. Do you recall how the judge called that one?
Yeah, the judge said he was basically like innocent of the wider crime. Yeah, because they had never discussed anything with him. He was just, I think he was the getaway driver or something. He was just someone who really barely had any involvement in this crime, and he was just kind of shocked they pulled out these guns and escalated. Okay. But anyway, it was interesting, and so she was maybe the only.
And did that work well as a date? Did you have good material to discuss afterwards?
Yeah, we did actually. Yeah, it was quite good. Nothing. I don't remember anything happening. I was pretty like out of it when I was a kid, so sure. We easily could have dated, but I was just like busy thinking about law, I suppose.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then can you tell me? I mean, this is a large question, but what did you learn about law and the Industrial Revolution when you did your PhD?
So the PhD was quite stressful because I
Was it more or less stressful than Inkhaven?
Oh, it's a lot more stressful.
Good.
It's a much heavier, like, existential burden. I mean, the problem is when it comes to history PhDs, if you're doing any history PhD which is actually interesting, that means you're investigating something which could go either way. So you could actually find nothing. Which a lot of history PhDs now, they'll just propose some PhD which they know they'll find something. They often already know the answer, actually. Whereas I was basically proposing one which was pretty risky, and it wasn't like one of these areas that had never been studied before, which is usually a pretty safe bet. This was one that a lot of people had studied before, which is contract law. But my proposal was to use a new methodology, which was to basically produce a quantitative model of the law, and basically just to see how many cases were actually being produced and decided, which no one had done before. They just said there's a lot more cases in the 19th century, and then yeah.
They did not have like a good order of magnitude estimates at the very least?
No, they had no order of magnitude estimates at all. So the way that traditionally legal history is done in the law faculty is they just read the law textbooks and they like work out what the law was from that, and that's their only level. It's like the map of the map almost. It's very abstract and high level.
Huh.
It's kind of, law is a synthetic subject, so it doesn't actually record like reality. It just records a constructed world of norms and rules. So they're living in a kind of, not fantasy, it's just a sort of abstract synthetic world.
I would have thought that good legal writing would involve a lot of historical detail about what the place was like and what the...
Oh yes, so they will sometimes they will do some what they call external legal history, which is like studying the actual context, but they never do anything at the kind of like the quantitative level. They don't study the legal system typically, unless you're a law and economist. So there's a few exceptions, but on the whole they don't touch that.
Okay.
So I did that. I looked at the quantitative trends, and I basically showed that there's like this vast increase in 1780, which is almost certainly a product of merchants going to the law courts a lot more. The reason they had to go to the law courts a lot more is because their volume of trade increased, and the distance by which they were trading increased, and they couldn't rely on local dispute resolution. So they had to go to the courts, and the courts never had that much volume before, so they kind of panicked, and they started transforming all the common law in that period, so you get a lot of interesting changes. And then by 1840, they've kind of redesigned the legal system to take that level of litigation activity. And then it peaks in 1860, and then actually, strangely, legal activity starts dropping and continuously drops and until today. It's actually an all-time low. By the 1880s, it sort of reached a sort of a valley, and it's just stayed there. So it's very counterintuitive. Like, it actually starts dropping in the 1880s.
Can you say slightly more about how the courts changed how they were dealing with it?
Yeah, so previously the courts were very informal. So if all the judges knew each other, and they would often decide legal cases at dinner. So they would have a legal case, and they would sort of say, I wonder what the law is, and they sort of go to dinner and might talk about it a little bit. They would leave cases unresolved. So they would just say, we're not going to decide this case. That was a bit earlier, but yes, there used to be a much stronger culture of just leaving cases undecided, because the cases were less important as a way of creating common knowledge. You could create common knowledge in the communities of the common law.
You'd say a few things to the relevant people, and that would get passed on, and then they would...
Well, they might just they might just say, like, there's no result, and then, like, the litigants would just have to be like, okay, I suppose. But and a lot of there was just a lot less law, and a lot less of it was textualized. And there weren't any formal rules about precedent, so cases had persuasive effect, but not according to any rules. It was just like, I like that guy, he's very good, let's follow this case because he's really smart. So it's kind of a rationalist approach, I suppose.
This sounds in contrast to, like, terrible stories I hear about various cases, or sorry, not cases, but like courtrooms today in, like, America or something, where they have so many cases that they can only spend like a minute on each one or something, and they make the decision there and then they move and move.
It used to be like that in the sort of 18th century. They used to spend, I think, like 15 minutes per case, and they would just it's like a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
So basically there was just not a lot of law. They had no system of precedent. And then suddenly, like, oh gosh, there's a lot of cases. And then they start reporting all the cases. And suddenly there's just like a huge volume of all this binding law. Or this huge volume, sorry, not of binding law, but this huge volume of, like, past decisions. And then suddenly courts are like, well, the businesses don't like it when we contradict our past decisions, so we should probably stick to them. And then they also, the other thing is, it's also different, but they used to give a lot more law to the jury.
Yeah.
So for example, they might say, you might go to court and you say, I made a contract with him and then he broke it, and I want to sue him for some money.
Yeah.
And the courts would say, okay, well, you stated your claim very well. Defendant, what do you think? And he's like, I deny everything. And they're like, cool. Jury, what do you think? And they're like, guilty. And they're like,
yeah.
Whereas today, you might say, like, okay, what are the criteria of a contract? What are the terms of the contract? Okay, has there been a breach of those terms? So it's all worked out in rules.
Huh.
Whereas back then, they just kicked it to the jury, and the jury could decide everything.
Is that true throughout Europe, that they were basing it in juries?
No, that was just a weird English thing. Yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah. England is very distinct from Europe in terms of its legal system.
And your focus is on England?
Yes.
I see.
Although I did work a bit in Germany, so I got to do some comparisons, which is interesting. It's very fascinating, actually. England probably had the fewest judges in Europe. So just, there were basically, like, it's like 15 or something.
I was going to say, it sounded like probably that lawyers would have boomed in number, and it would have become more lucrative had there been a lot more people to pay you.
So the total number of lawyers does increase. They were able to cap the number of judges pretty well until the 1840s with the county courts, and then they suddenly increased quite dramatically, the number of judges. Anyway, so there are all these new cases, and essentially when you have that many cases, you need a cognitive filtering system. So they come up with precedent, which basically tells you which cases you need to pay attention to and which you can ignore. And of course, the ones you pay attention to are the ones from the top level of court, which has its own downsides, because, maybe the guy in the top level court is an idiot, like the House of Lords. Maybe the House of Lords are stupid, and they decide a case, and you're like, I don't agree with this, but I have to follow it.
Yeah,
that's the trade-off with having a cognitive filtering system. But that's essentially what they developed slowly over the course of the 1840s.
When you say cognitive filtering system?
Yeah, or like a filtering system just for cognitive manageability, because they have just so many cases, and they can't actually choose between them.
And they have to optimize for predictability with the outcomes as well.
Yes, that's right. So it has to be cognitively manageable for the lawyers. It has to create legal certainty for the businesses mainly.
Were you surprised to learn this? Was this something you didn't know going into the PhD?
Well, I knew this is
Or what was most
this was
surprising?
kind of the vague story, right, that was told in that period, but this is like a sort of Gears level explanation for
Great.
how this actually
Yeah.
works. At the lowest level, like conceivable. So I was looking at sort of every case that had been reported, which people don't tend to do. Um, that wasn't that surprising. I already kind of knew that,
I see.
but I didn't know how. And I have a very deep understanding now of how this process worked. What was very surprising is seeing the cases fall, right? Because the population doesn't fall in 1880, total business doesn't fall continuously after 1880. Sure, there are economic crises, but the cases just fall continuously, which is very unexpected. And that's probably the more controversial aspect of my findings, because most legal historians are just like, what? That can't be. I'm like, yeah, it's true. And they're like, have you checked the price of paper? And I'm like, it's not the price of paper. I promise it's not that. That doesn't make any sense.
I also, I had a fun experience recently looking into the history of great conflagrations and fires.
Okay, yes, cool.
And I kind of just predicted that, things would get safer in more recent times. But indeed, there was like obviously massive peaks during the Industrial Revolution of like total fires.
Right, because you have boiler explosions and
Yep,
all
and
manner
just
of
all manners of new things.
sparks from
Also,
railways.
the older conflagrations, they say like the whole city burned down or something. Turns out the cities weren't very big back then.
Right, yeah.
There's actually not that much of a fire relative to some of the big,
Truly large infernos.
Yeah, you go, wow, the whole city? And they go, yeah, it was a square mile. And you go, oh, well, it was,
Okay, that's just like a normal industrial accident.
And they're all wooden houses connected at the time. Anyway, but yeah, just the shapes of the ups and downs. I was really expecting a simple story, and it was surprising.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for quantitative historical research because it produces like mysteries, which you can then explain.
Yeah.
And if you don't do any quantitative research, it just becomes it's very hard to get an actual idea of what's going on.
Which turns me, I think, to another subject I want to ask you about, which is Inkhaven.
Sure,
You've been here for 10 days.
Right, yeah.
Curious how it's been, whether anything's been surprising, or what surprised you about it so far.
Well, this is kind of random, but I tend to answer questions like this randomly. My appetite is really low. Like, I think there's something in the American food. It's just like sating me very quickly.
Oh.
And I'm eating like 2 meals a day, which is very unusual. I'm doing a lot of exercise, and I'm not losing any weight, and it's just fine. It's really weird.
Wonderful. That's not normally the experience of people here. I think, what was David Friedman calling our kitchen? Some sort of public nuisance or
right,
something?
Yeah, all the snacks.
Attractive nuisance, I think was the phrase.
Very nice. Yeah. Yeah, I've just not been... That's one of the strange things that I didn't expect.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's been very good. I have mixed feelings about the format. I don't really need like a writing deadline to motivate me to write. I actually usually write 500 words just regardless every day.
Right.
So it's like kind of not very difficult. So I'm not getting any benefit from that. But I am suffering in the sense that I do like to work much longer on the projects that I have. Not necessarily huge amounts of time, but like maybe like 4 or 5 days per piece, which, is different. I'm just taking it as an opportunity to practice my blogging style.
Yeah.
Basically, which has worked out pretty well.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I practice condensing ideas, coming up with interesting concepts, which I may expand later. I'm amazed at how little I leave. I'm also slightly ashamed. And I should probably leave the Lighthaven compound, if that's what you want to call it, more frequently, because there's like a whole world of Berkeley out there. I went to the campus a couple of times, and it was very beautiful, and I was like, wow. But I don't know, I'm like, why don't I come out more often?
Yeah. That makes sense. So you've done 10 days. Is there anything you'd like to do differently over the next 20 days?
Yeah, so I have quite a lot of material in the barrel, as it were. I did a huge research project just for fun last summer, digitizing old exam questions from Britain from the last 100 years, going back to 1850.
Exam, like GCSEs, A-levels?
Actually, they're S-levels. So there used to be a level above A-level called the S-level. Which was the scholarship level. It sort of allocated scholarships to university. Some people call it the SWAT level because it's just like really, really hard. That is like by far the hardest high school exam I've ever seen. So
in all subjects?
It's very hard in all subjects. I'm not counting the university admissions exams in Cambridge because they're not really sat in high school. You sit them in the term after.
Oxford and Cambridge have some challenging, especially Cambridge.
There used to be step questions for all subjects actually, and they restricted it to maths in the 90s, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, the S level is ludicrously hard. So you might, for example, if you're doing an English S level paper, it might have something like here is a sort of early folio of one of Shakespeare's sonnets, and now compare it to a later edition and explain why he made the changes he made, which is quite difficult.
Sure.
There was another question for French, which was translate the following into English, and it was just like a long passage by Voltaire, and you're like, that's really hard to translate. That's shockingly difficult. Or in Russian, it might be like a really long tract from, say, like Dostoevsky or something. You just had to translate it. So yeah, very just a very hard exam. Anyway, so I've been collecting those, and I have a lot of material, so I want to write about that.
Nice. Curious how you feel about the people here. What do you have in common with them, and what is different between you and the
Yeah, I
people
think there's
here?
a lot of selection bias, right? So
Yes.
like the people who are basically outgoing and sociable are just like percolating all the time in the social areas. So I hang out with them all the time because I'm quite gregarious. And I don't know, I seem to only have met about 10 or like 15 people regularly a day.
Yeah.
Even though there's way more on the cohort,
Yeah.
and I just don't run into them because they're in their rooms writing
Yeah.
or whatnot. If I was to offer, this has been mentioned as well by some others, it would be nice to have more like whole group activities. Not a lot, because that's obviously a bit suffocating, but maybe like one or two more might be nice. I'm sure like the trip to Bodega Bay will be really good because we'll all be brought together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the people are fascinating. They all have insane life stories. I met one person and I was like, so she was like, I have such a hangover. Alcohol's the worst drug. And I was like, it can't be the worst drug. And she's like, no, it's the worst drug. I'm like, well, how many drugs have you tried? She's like, all of them. I'm like, all of them. And then she just started explaining all these drugs that she had done. I was like, crystal meth as well? And she's like, yeah, crystal meth's fine. I'm like, what? Compared to a beer? I mean, surely. But then I just had to take her word for it. And then I met another guy, and he was just obsessed with Costco. And he's like, I have shares in Costco, just to let you know. And I was like, so what do you do? And he's like, well, I was working in a company installing Christmas lights. But then we started running the largest Minecraft conference in America, or like, largest meetup. And I was like, what? What sort of what sort of crazy nonsense pair of jobs is that?
I know who the second one of those two people is.
Just a
I love the
fascinating
write-up
mixture.
about running that conference. That was part of why I admitted them. It's the craziest write-up. It's also very good.
Yes.
It has good practical advice in it.
Yeah, it's just a sort of bamboozling mixture of people, just with so many different, like light, crazy, and everyone seems to just have insane. Any hobby they have, they just take to the nth degree. So I was speaking with one guy about opera, and I'm a pretty low-level opera enjoyer, right? I'm not. I've seen maybe a few. And then I was speaking to this other guy, and he's seen a lot of opera. And then another guy comes up, and he's like, "Are you talking about opera?" And we were like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, let me show you my blog post of my 100 favorite operas." He's like, "I had to cut it down though because there were just too many before." And I was like, "100? Like, wow, impressive."
It reminds me of, do you know the blogger Piero Scaraffi?
No, I don't.
He's got, I believe, the oldest website on the internet that is still being updated.
Right.
He's an older guy.
Cool.
And one of the substance of the website is lists. It's like, would you like the top 100 pieces of literature in, from Estonia in the last 200 years? Here it is.
This sounds like a Borges story. This is the man who lists, and he's just stuck listing things.
Every year, he has every film ranked. He has not. He has spent many years watching a lot of films. And now he's built up a taste of reviewers. So they always link, like, for all great directors, you can find. So he's not only got like ratings of the films, but he also, for like, I believe more than half of them, or at least a sizable amount of them, just wrote down everything that happened in the film.
That's completely pointless. That's ridiculous. It's like
I know. And similar for a lot of music albums, like
that
music
guy,
albums.
when they train like an LLM on his corpus, it's just going to completely upload him, right? It's just going to be a version of him. I think Goran calls it like beta uploading. They'll just be like this guy.
Anyway, I think he lives in California. I keep meaning to invite him to things. But I found great music and great films through his website.
Sure, right.
He
Yeah.
reminded me of him. You wrote a piece titled "More Legal Systems Different from Our Own," or even more different from our own. Sorry, I forgot the names exactly. But David Friedman was here.
Yes.
Curious if you had any interesting conversations with
We
him.
spoke a little bit about it, but we have very different interests. So I'm interested in the legal system for its own sake, which I mentioned in the piece that I read out. I'm basically intrigued in like legal botany is how I describe it. I just like to see how the rules move, because law does kind of operate in a strangely autonomous manner, kind of like a plant, whereas he's purely economic. He has, and it's not that what he writes in the original is wrong legally, per se. It's directionally correct enough for him to make his coordination points, but it is filled with, like, overgeneralizations and sort of points that you're like, well, it's not 100%. I mean, but he himself would probably admit that, because if you look at sort of sources, he's just using kind of like the most basic level of legal source. Whereas I'm really interested in like the deep level of how the legal systems work. So we didn't actually meet that closely, and I'm thinking of retitling it "Legal Systems Stranger from Ours" to avoid this conflation of sort of people who are like, oh boy, I can't wait for more coordination, sort of strange coordination systems.
I see.
And they're like, this isn't coordination, this is just like weird Nazi law.
Yeah. I have to ask you, why did you write a 70-plus page manuscript by the title of The Book of Advanced Daydreaming? Where did this come from? Do you daydream a lot?
Yes, so during lockdown, I was daydreaming a lot. Not proud of that fact, but I was.
I love daydreaming. I do it regularly.
Yes, so I'm apparently an unusual daydreamer in that I was speaking to a friend and I was explaining how I daydream, and she's like, wow, that's weird. I was like, really? And then I asked her and she daydreamed. I'm like, wow, that's also quite strange. And then I realized that people daydream in very different ways, in the same way that people shower in very different ways, because no one teaches you how to daydream or how to shower. So people do all sorts of weird stuff.
And they don't talk about it very much.
They don't talk about it. Well, daydreaming is... So I have a theory, right, that night dreaming is a load of nonsense, right? Like, you don't learn anything from your night dreams. That's why people tell you about them, because they actually reveal nothing about their personal life. But if you ask someone about their daydreams, they'll almost certainly not tell you what they daydream about.
Ooh.
Because it actually contains a lot of information about themselves. So if you want like high signal insight into yourself, just write down what you daydream about. People don't do that, of course, because it's just depressing. Because they're like, oh, I daydream a lot about owning a BMW. Like, is that my true self? And you're like, well, kind of, because that's what you're thinking about all the time.
I think I often daydream about situations where I will have to quietly take some costs out of a principle. And I go, yes, this will be correct. And this helps me prepare for situations where I have to do that later on.
Right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, that sort of fits in the broader... I have a chapter on this, which is about using daydream to train yourself to do things. So supposedly athletes and piano players and musicians and whatnot, they can get a lot of the benefits from practice just from daydreaming it.
Oh, yeah.
So you can just daydream playing the piano, and that's like, I think it's maybe 70 or 80% effective. Which
Are you a musician?
I play piano, yes.
Nice. Yeah, I went to music school, did classical guitar. I think sometimes just working through a piece and hearing like the bass line and thinking about it is helpful.
Yeah, I think daydreaming is actually not dissimilar from scrolling on your phone, in that you can just kind of allow like stuff to come up from wherever it's coming up from and just let it play. And you're like, hey, yeah, this is great. Or you can do it more deliberately, and then you get a lot more benefits from it, but it's not so necessarily so relaxing. So where I differed with my friend is that I'm quite deliberate in how I daydream. So I like to learn things about myself. So I was daydreaming about something, and I'm like, if I remove this element, how would I feel about this daydream? And I'm like, it's still quite appealing. And I'm like, if I remove this element, do I still find it appealing? And I'm like, no. So I'm like, clearly it was this thing that was like the core.
Fascinating. I'm starting to think about my own daydreaming, which again, I've never spoken with anyone about. The other time I do a lot of it is, there's like, often in my morning, there's like, somehow like an hour or even 2 hours sometimes where I'm like technically, or if I opened my eyes, I would forget everything.
Yes.
But I'm like barely awake.
Oh, that's a strange place.
Yeah. And I do a lot of daydreaming in that cognitive space.
Yes, a sort of a dozing mode.
Yes.
That's very strange. I often get that when I'm falling asleep. I'll be closing my eyes and I'm still conscious, but then all this weird stuff starts intruding on what I'm thinking. So I'll be like, I wonder what I'm going to have for dinner tomorrow. And then this like sort of wacky duck will come in. It's like, oh, maybe you should try. I'm like, yeah, that's right, Mr. Duck. And I'm like, oh, God. So I actually surveyed a lot of people, not like sort of robustly, but I went round when I traveled for all my conferences. I would go around and ask people what they daydreamed about, and I collected a bunch of interesting daydreams, which are in the book. I daydreamed about one. I spoke to one person. I'm like, so what do you daydream about? And she's like, I daydream about dying. I'm like, really? Like, this is like ideation? And she's like, no, I don't want to commit suicide. I daydream about dying and then having a funeral, and then all my family members come,
right?
And then they cry, and they realized how much they love me and how they wish they treated me better when I was alive. Which I was like, wow, okay, that's...
I think I have a similar sense of, part of why I don't want to mention my daydreams is that imagine very satisfying scenarios. And
Yes, yeah,
it seems self-indulgent to just sit here thinking about scenarios where I'm the best.
Yeah, right.
And I'm great.
Yes, exactly. So it's yeah, there's another one I was speaking to, like this is a crazy story which I won't go into, but I was living in this house and the landlord's kids were living there too, which was suboptimal. But they I was speaking to them about their daydreams, and the boy was like, I like to daydream that I'm playing with my friend Adam. I'm like, can't you just play with him? And he's like, oh, he's not nice to me anymore. I was like, oh, that's really sad. This is really sad. Yeah, so that was just the project, and then I spent like maybe 2 or 3 months just sitting daydreaming and just like thinking about daydreams. So it's actually chock-a-block with stuff about daydreaming.
Actually, I think a lot of my work projects come out of daydreams.
Yes, they can be productive.
I think Inkhaven was somewhat of a day. I was like, it's going to be amazing, and I would just sit and think about how amazing it would be. And then at some point, I would like announce that I was running Inkhaven.
Right, and then
I don't daydream about it too
reality,
much.
Yeah.
At that point, I'm just like, okay, and what's going to happen by what date? I need to get to that. Okay, and then at some point it happens. And I'm just like, whoa, in it or something.
Yeah, yeah. The
But you mentioned in your application that it was partly for your grandfather you wrote the thing?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got very lucky, and I attended a conference in Harvard in like 2021, I think, or 2023. I came over, and then I was like, this is great. I can go visit my granddad. And it was right before he died, so he was actually still compos mentis, which was lucky. And then we just...
How old was he when he passed away?
90, I think, 91.
Wow.
All my grandparents lived to 90, pretty much, so I'm very long-lived.
That's good.
But anyway, so I was speaking to him, and I was just asking him about his daydreams, and he sort of was like, grabbed my hand and was like, look, like, the people that you daydream about the most are the ones that you care about. And I was like, whoa, okay. That's true, yeah. So that was quite solemn, and he was very interested in my project, so...
That's nice.
Yeah, it's a very strange book that I produced from it, because it's not actually just written from my voice. It's kind of a pseudo book. It's like it's presented as a sort of a book written by someone else.
Yeah, in some fictional world.
Yeah, in some fictional world. Yeah, so it's
yeah,
it was a good project. I don't really think about it very much anymore, to be honest. It just lives there in my blog.
I enjoyed. I was reading your application, and I was reading like different pieces about law and different political pieces, and that one was there as well. I was like, wow, this guy's got a real eclectic set of interests.
Yeah. Yeah.
You wrote a piece called "In Defense of Knowledge."
Yes.
Do you think of knowledge as like central to, or accumulating or developing new knowledge as central to your outlook on the world and your goals in writing?
Yeah, I think like the sort of explainer piece or the synthesis piece isn't really cutting it for me particularly. So I'm going forward, I want to focus more on pieces which just basically add to the amount of new knowledge which hasn't been discovered anywhere else. Hence the exam project, because no one has ever studied these exams, and it's nowhere. It's digitized in nowhere, so it's completely new. I mean, that piece in particular was really just about, we think of knowledge as something that you just accumulate for functional purposes, but the point of the essay was that actually, if you accumulate knowledge, it's fun. It improves your life, it enriches your life. Not just the process of learning, but the process of having a lot of knowledge at your disposal as you see the world does actually enrich your life, which is not... It's one of these insights which is not particularly novel. It sounds kind of cliched that knowledge transforms your world, but I don't think very many people think that way.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, good luck in accumulating more knowledge for humanity.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I do my best.
Well, thanks so much for being on this little podcast of mine.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to reading more of your posts across Inkhaven and beyond. All right, farewell. We are done. This is over. We nailed it. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to thank our sponsor for this episode, WordPress.com. As a teenager, many of the blogs I grew up reading were built using WordPress, such as Slatestar Codex, Don't Worry About the Vars, and Steffel Optimized. The co-founder of WordPress, Matt Mullenweg, went on to build WordPress.com, a hosting service that supports bloggers. It provides an interface that allows you to design your website and to use the near infinite family of libraries and plugins that have been built for WordPress. If you're someone who cares to be able to design your own blog, for your ideas, for your writing, and for your own aesthetic, then by far one of the best options on the internet today is WordPress.com.